This is Autoline After Hours with John McElroy and Gary Vasilash, episode 508 for May 7th of 2020, Grooming, a New Generation of Race Engineers. Watch Autoline After Hours live at Autoline.tv every Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 12 p.m. Pacific. You can subscribe to this podcast for free by searching for Autoline in iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires. Your journey, our passion.
Gary, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Hey, I just saw your Cars Without Coffee with John Krafchick. That was pretty good.
Oh, thank you. And you notice I've got the official.
Woohoo! Look at that.
See there? So all of you who are watching who may be jealous to have one of these, go to Autoline.tv, and there on the left side you can get merch. So yeah.
Autoline merchandise.
Yeah,
hey, so tell the viewers a little bit. What is your Cars Without Coffee thing?
Well, so given the fact that there's Cars and Coffee happening across the country where people get together with their personal favorite rides, and they have a meetup usually on a Saturday morning, and there's coffee involved. But of course, with the lockdown across the country, this couldn't happen, right? So I decided that what I would do is I'd reach out to people that I know in the industry. So we've had Ralph Gilles. Today we have John Krafchick, who runs Waymo. We've had Chris Chapman, who's been on the show, the head designer for Hyundai. So I've had about a dozen people. And so all I say is to these guys, go out to your garage, take out your phone, take a picture. I mean, I don't want, the sort of photography that we get from the PR staffs, and tell me what the car is and why it's cool. And so we've been doing this and trying to keep people engaged in this whole aspect of the industry that is gone to abeyance for a little while now. So that's what it's about. So,
good stuff. Good
yeah,
stuff.
it is.
Hey, we got to let everybody know we got Jason Fogelson with us. Jason, come on in here. There you are.
How are you guys?
Oh, look at this. He's got to be a guitar fanatic with guitars hanging. Or is that a guitar? Is that a ukulele? It's hard for. Oh, you got all kinds there.
Yeah, I am a guitar collector.
Oh, a collector.
Do you play?
Yeah, I do play. I collect better than I play.
That's great. So what's the most valuable guitar that you've got?
Oh, none of them are tremendously valuable. They're all personally valuable. I guess I've got a National steel guitar that was personally made for me by the folks at National. That's probably my most monetarily valuable guitar. And I just love that one. You remember the cover of Dire Straits' Brothers in Arms, the steel guitar with the palm trees etched on it? It's that same model.
That's cool. That's cool.
Yeah.
Well, good. Great to have you on the show with us. And we also got to let everybody know, and let's bring him in. Chris Ciuca from the Society of Automotive Engineers. Hello there, Chris.
Hey, John. How are you today? Hi,
Gary. Doing pretty good. Yeah. So, Chris, what's your official title at SAE?
So my official title is Vice President of Programs at SAE International.
And today we want to talk about at least certainly one program in particular, Formula SAE. Just give us the thumbnail of what that's all about.
Well, the big kind of celebration, if you will, of thumbnail is 40 years. So we've been doing SAE for 40 years, started way back in 1981 and in Austin, Texas, out of the University of Texas, and been growing ever since. I think most of this audience knows us for our participation at Michigan International Speedway, but what we're doing now is bringing together every year at MIS and in California as well, bring together over 120 unique universities to come together and participate in the Formula SAE competition.
So basically, right now you'd be in Michigan, right?
Yes, right. The plan was for me to drive over to the studios from MIS to do this live, but of course, with the current situation we're all in, it's a virtual world. So, unfortunately, we are not live this week.
So what would the students have been doing out at Michigan International Speedway?
Yeah.
Were you there? And the weather, by the way, is great here. So
I know, fantastic. It's such a shame. But one of the things that we've kept about 70% of the competition, the static percent of the competition. So Gary, you made a really good point in the introduction there is around engagement. One of the really irresponsible things for us to do would have been to just cancel the entire event for the students. We have students that are coming up through this opportunity that they have 4 years to do this, and then they're done. So just to cancel the event, even though we couldn't get out there live in a large public gathering, we moved that into a virtual space, which I can talk about a little bit later. But to answer your question directly, the live engagement would have been these 120 universities bringing their Formula SA car out, doing everything from brake tests to endurance tests, straight through, just like they would do in any motorsports competition.
And Chris, so they have to design, fabricate, race, and as you said, in various categories, they have to be able to do things with their car.
Yeah, so the tagline is design, build, compete. So they start from the very ground up. They're designing the suspension. They're designing the engines. Of course, we have a rule set and a set of parameters that they have to very closely follow. But they're building everything from the ground up. So these are teams of freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors that come together and build this car fresh every year. We see a lot of learning that's transitioned year after year within individual university teams or systems, but it's a fresh build every year, and that's one of the things that you'll see a lot of universities using this as a capstone senior design project. Some universities are treating it as a club, others are doing it as a 4-credit course. So it's really it's that overarching engagement to build a car from the ground up and then bring it out and compete. So
SAE's been doing this for 40 years now. Obviously, you're too young to have been part of this for the entire 40 years. But I mean, what are some of the highlights over the years that has come out of?
Yeah. So, I mean, great question. So we started this actually started, there's a gentleman, his name is Ron Matthews. He is a faculty advisor out of the University of Texas, Austin. Ron, I'm sorry, is still the faculty advisor for that team after 40 years. So that's where this originally came. Ron approached the Society of Automotive Engineers at the time to build out a collegiate competition, and we started with 4 teams. So these first 4 teams at this competition in Austin, we knew that really to grow it as an organization, it had a home in southeastern Michigan. So when we actually moved it from Austin back in the 80s and into the early 90s, our first competition was held there. It was at the Milford Proving Grounds, and that's when things really took off. When GM stepped up to host the very first one in southeastern Michigan, and then shortly after that, a consortium model was built where Ford hosted and Chrysler at the time hosted. So that's when the thing really grew legs and really became a major recruiting platform for not only the big 3 at the time in industry, but also into the supplier space. And now we see some of our largest recruiters out of this competition, in many cases, aren't even automotive companies. They're aerospace companies as well. So that's kind of the high level evolution of the thing. It's now very much a recruiting platform for engineering in general.
Chris, you mentioned a recruiting platform. Talk a little bit more about that. Does SAE go out and do it? Does the car companies or the suppliers or the aerospace companies you're talking about? How does that work?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So a lot of the companies that are interested in recruiting out of Formula SAE, one of the things that you have to that's important to know about the competition is even though we're building that car at the beginning of this particular experience, this was a very grassroots efforts. This was coming out of the mechanical engineering, programs within the universities. Now we see, the MEs are of course still there, but the electrical engineers, the computer engineers, we have marketing majors on the team, finance majors on the team. These are running like businesses. So when we set up these recruitment partnerships, we have folks like, the General Motors or the FEVs of the world or the Bosches of the world that are coming in, not only to recruit for talent, but also to position that future talent through things like skill shops. So these partners are designing educational experiences for these students to go through as they're building their vehicle to compete. So it's really an all-inclusive process. It's allowing the industry to access to the students when they're undergraduates and graduate students to just help for that workforce readiness aspect of recruiting.
Chris,
over the 40 years, you must have some success stories you can tell us about.
Yeah, sure. I think one of the pieces that was really there's a couple of kind of success stories for the industry that I'll speak to, and one I touched on a little bit there about the consortium model, right? When back in the late 80s. Bringing GM and Ford and Chrysler to the table around a common cause of the workforce development type programs that they all needed, right? A whole thing started out of, it was actually an NSF study that launched a lot of the educational programming that SAE still runs today around the potential engineering shortage. Now acronyms like STEM education are just they're second nature to us. But that's probably the biggest success story that we can claim as an organization is that we were at the root of that issue where now science, technology, engineering, and math it's nothing to go to a career fair and talk to students who are going to become an engineer, right? Back in the 80s, that was a huge fear point for our industry was where's all this talent going to come from? Now you see a major pivot towards a lot of our auto manufacturers are becoming, they're becoming instructional technology companies. When you're looking at automated vehicles, you're looking at all these different things that are going into the production of the vehicle. They're hiring software engineers now. So that's kind of the next pivot that we're starting to see happen is we're able to build out these educational programs to service that need. So that's probably the most exciting thing for us to see as a major milestone. And that next one's right in our laps right now.
Chris, tell us a little bit about the cars that these students are developing. Are they internal combustion engines? Are they electric cars? Are they fuel cell cars?
It's a good question. So the majority of the teams that you see that are performing outstandingly. It's not I don't mean to. This isn't a lessening the IC class. But you're starting to see some of the top tier teams are transitioning into the electric classes. So right now we're seeing tremendous growth in the electric drivetrain platforms. There's options for both. A lot of limiting factors on some universities is cost with developing and through the electric class, if you will. So we are still offering both, but we're seeing a very, very significant growth, almost exponential in transition to electric drive chains. But the IC class is still very much there. That's still all of Michigan's competition. You'll see that competition transitioning in the coming year or two here to include the electric classes. But the Formula North competition that we run, and then ultimately the California competition is majority electric in the next couple of years.
Chris, what do companies like about this program that they use it as a recruiting tool and recruit out of it?
Yeah, it's the team aspect that's built. They know that you can you pick your major engineering university in the United States or in any part of the world. They know that the students have the technical book smarts or knowledge, work in the field by earning that degree. What they don't always have is they don't always have the ability to work within a team. If you come up as an individual, you come up against a roadblock in design. How do you solve that through other resources? So I know the last time I was on the show, you were out to view the auto drive challenge, right? Something like an automated car, an electric or an electric platform in Formula SE isn't something that a group of 2 or 3 mechanical engineers can sit and produce all by themselves anymore. It takes that collaborative, interconnective teamwork to be able to go out and find solutions. It's not always a direct path to get to a solution. And that's what industry values the most. They see they're able to bring these students in as young professionals, and they've already worked on a team. They already know what an engineering design team is. They have that background. So that's probably the biggest aspect. And that's where we start to see this branching out. And even though we're quote unquote building race cars, we're, some of our highest recruiters by numbers are in the aerospace industry for Formula SAE.
What I'm curious about is I know how any racing program goes, whether it's a student one, a hobby one, or a professional one. They put in a lot of hours, especially as they get closer and closer to competition. So many hours, in fact, that maybe their studies and other topics fall by the wayside, and maybe their GPA isn't as great as it might have been had they not been in Formula SAE. How forgiving are companies of that sort of situation when they go to recruit? Because, as you know, some of the top engineering companies, you got to have at least a 3.5 GPA or they're not even going to talk to you.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great point, and it's the and there's kind of an off the record joke, if you will, that you probably don't have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and you probably don't have a very high GPA if you're in some of these engineering design programs, because you're right, you're putting in that just enormous amount of work. And many hours, after hours in the shops. A lot of the universities are very gracious about leaving resources open to the students after a typical, shutdown, and everybody goes home at 6 o'clock at night. So I think one of the things that's our responsibility as an organization is to put those recruiters in the experience with the students. So they see that, and if they do come out, they're not a 3.8 or a 4.0 student. They're valuing that technical talent and that teamwork in different ways. So it's being able to kind of shine the light on that balancing act between what value these students are really bringing to the table. Now, I'm not going to say that's by and large the majority of our students, or we have, we track GPAs. We know exactly where these kids are, and they're very, very extremely high performing students. But you're right, it takes a lot of time out of your hands where you could be sitting in a library studying.
Well, I've got to believe, Chris, that a lot of the people that are at the companies now, once upon a time, they were part of Formula SAE.
Yeah.
So they have an understanding of what's going on there.
Yeah, it's funny. I just share a conversation I had just on Tuesday of this week. An aerospace company talking about the Formula SAE jackets that are still hanging on the backs of the chairs in their offices of their leadership teams, right? So that's the alumni base that's come through 40 years of this program. We have folks that are there's folks on the SAE board of directors right now that participated in a Baja team. The chairman of the SAE Foundation was on a Baja team, and these are very high level executives within the industry. So there's this culture that's been created of folks that are actually looking for that type of. we're working on right now with a badging and credentialing system, because we, quite frankly, we see some students that are going for industry jobs claiming things like Baja or Formula SA experience and haven't been on a team, and they get caught very quickly in the line of questioning. But it's that type of that's the next level for us, is how we can help industry continue to vet those students and what type of performance they've done on those teams.
Do racing teams come and recruit out of there? I would imagine some of those students go into that maybe with the hopes that they end up on a racing team.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some of our highest level judges within Formula SA are leading racing teams. There's certainly a lot of recruitment that comes through there. We have folks that have been involved with General Motors race teams in Hendricks Motorsports, and there's definitely I wouldn't say it's the core focus, but there's a lot of high level interest there, because the students have experienced that stress, right? Not that engineering is stressful, but having, working from design and then proof of your design and then being on site for it to perform, that's a unique thing sometimes to racing. So it's intriguing to those folks as well for recruitment.
So I remember, John, last year when we were at the Auto Drive Challenge, the enthusiasm that we saw among these student teams. I mean, it was just palpable. I mean, that electricity was in the air, and it was so cool to see that. And remember Dan Nicholson from General Motors was wandering around the paddock area there, and you could tell that they were that all the participants were getting more out of it than one could have imagined they would.
Yeah. Well, the old adage, competition improves the breed. And
right.
What's great about motor racing, any kind of racing really, is you better have your car on the grid and ready to go. There's no like, oh, the supplier was late and we'll come back in another. No, it better be ready right now. And that's some of the tension and the pressure, I think, Chris, that automakers are looking for. People who can work under pressure when, there's all kinds of demands being thrown at them, and they stay level-headed, cool-headed, and get the job done.
Yeah. That's one of the things that we see. We start to see that in other industries are really learning from the automotive industry. When you look at things like urban air mobility or eVTOL aircraft, there's not really anything that exists like motorsports on that side of the house to drive innovation. So those are areas that we're also looking at. How do you in the aerospace sector? It's the automotive is ahead in this space to where they have that long-term kind of development pipeline set up through programs like SAE's programs. Of course, I'll talk about those ones. But it's there's kind of a long-term culture that's been created. We're starting students in these types of educational programs at the pre-K level, and going through. I know you're familiar and have experienced the Award of Motion program at the elementary level. So that's the kind of that long-term look, as if we want students to be building a Formula SAE car as a college student, what them thinking like as a fifth grader? What type of experiences do we want them to be engaged with there? And then kind of building that talent pipeline throughout is another piece that makes this just incredibly proud to be part of it, for sure.
Gary mentioned AutoDrive, which is for autonomous vehicles.
Yeah,
you
sure.
brought up Baja, which is for Baja type vehicles, off-road and the like. How many different categories are there? Are those the ones?
Yeah, that's a good question. So AutoDrive is there. Baja is an off-road vehicle that we provide the engines. We have a partnership with Briggs & Stratton, provide the engines for the students. They build everything else. It's a little more wheel to wheel. So their endurance race is all the competition, all the students on the track at the same time. We also offer and have an air design competition, which incorporates everything from designing an aircraft with a weight with a lift to weight ratio to transport goods and services, to autonomous flight, to we have another competition class within that particular competition that is a mission to Mars, where they have to autonomously deliver habitat and goods. We run an AeroConnect competition, which is a simulation that has students put in a scenario of going out and collecting data and coming back to distinguish wildfires in the state of California. So there's this broad aspect of different types of students. Some of those programs are designed to really engage computer science, computer engineering at the core. Others are more mechanical based. Others are more just it's incorporating that broad aspect of all the different types of skill sets that the mobility industry needs.
Real good. Well, Chris, thanks so much for coming back on the show. I think it's really cool.
Anytime.
Man, I wish I had gotten involved in one of those Formula SAE. Not that I'm an engineer. I could have maybe driven for them.
Sure.
But I think what you guys are doing, and especially with the World in Motion that you mentioned, getting kids involved at the grade school level, even pre-K, that's amazing.
Yeah. I was gonna say, when I was in 5th grade, I couldn't have imagined being interested in engineering.
Yeah. Well, Chris, again, thanks so much for coming on the show, and we'll probably have you back again in the future.
Absolutely, anytime.
We're good. We're going to take a quick break right now and give a shout out to our good friends at Bridgestone. All right, we're back, and we're going to be talking about all kinds of things going on in the auto industry right now. I don't know, Gary, is there a Dr. Data today or no?
There is not a number. They promised me next week.
Okay, we'll do that. Well, I know you've got a list of topics that you think that you, me, and Jason should get into.
Here's a number, 294 million. It's the profit that General Motors released this week. So what do you think about what's going on with GM? GM managing to eke out a profit despite bad conditions in Q1.
I was stunned that they turned a profit. Absolutely stunned. And it was a 3% margin, which in normal days you'd sneer at, but these days, I don't know how they did it. That's really impressive in my book.
They must have had a great January.
Well, they did. I mean, their truck sales have really come on strong. Their SUVs continue to sell strong. And you're right, Jason. They had a pretty good January. In fact, they were going strong until everything shut down. And what they've said is in some states, mainly out west and down south, where the coronavirus, at least at that point, had not hit as hard, sales were going strong until everything got shut down.
But it's sort of interesting if you think about it. Like last fall, we were talking about, the GM pickup trucks are not doing so well, and Ram is just, eating their lunch. And of course, the F-150 is impenetrable in terms of anybody taking anything out of its hide. I mean, that is the thing that surprises me about what's going on with GM's numbers. Because, as we talked about last week on the show, it was like $2.2 billion that Ford lost, right?
Yeah.
Or was it just $2 billion?
Yeah, I don't remember offhand, and they're saying they could lose as much as $5 billion for the year. So, but going back, what GM said all along is like, hey, look, we don't have our full lineup of trucks out. Wait until we get our full lineup of trucks. Well, we'll have that in the fall of 2019. The fall of 2019 came, and to your point, a Ram was still selling fantastically well. Well, now the momentum is starting to go in GM's favor. Ram is still close, nipping at their heels, but they're starting to pull away from it. And remember, we got to look at total pickups, not just Chevrolet Silverado. You got to throw the GMC Sierra. You got to throw in the Colorado. And what's the other one I'm blanking out on for the moment? Yeah, so when you put the whole ball of wax together, GM dominates the pickup segment.
Mm-hmm. Jason,
what do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think people often separate those out and forget that GMC and Chevrolet are really a combined effort. I mean, they're built in the same factory. It's just a marketing difference, really.
Yeah.
So, I mean, one of the things that I think is interesting is that when GM did its call, they were talking about they're going to continue to focus on cost reduction measures. And, as we've talked about, that General Motors has sort of picked its spots, saying Europe is not where it needs to be anymore, that it's focusing on China and on North American markets. Do you think that strategy is a good one, John?
I do. I mean, it's the reality. Look, ideally, as an automaker, you want to be in every market and you want to be in every segment of the market. I mean, from little cars all the way up to big trucks. But the reality is the competition is such that you got to go where you can make money. It no longer makes any sense whatsoever to be in segments and invest in segments where you're never going to have any return on that money. So in the past, it was like, yeah, we'll build these entry-level cars and we'll lose money on them, but we'll bring people into the brand and we'll move them up over time. Well, guess what? You don't have time to do that anymore. So I think GM has really set the pace for the rest of the industry by saying, you know what? We'll knock our brains out. We'll try to do it. We'll really try to make a profit on this. But after years of trying on that, if we can't do it, we're out of there. And I think you're going to start to see other automakers do the same.
Okay, so this is a nice segue into a topic that Jason had, and I'm going to twist it up a little bit. So Jason suggested to me that he was wondering whether low fuel prices, low travel demand is going to cause EVs to be put on the back burner. Now, if we go to what you just said, John, I mean, who's making money on EVs right now?
Yeah, but and Jason, I'd like to get you in on this too, but I'll say my but first. Mary Barra made it very clear they are not cutting back on their EV program. They're going full bore on it. They think that with their vertical integration of making batteries in-house with their partner and all that they're going to come out of this in an even stronger position vis-a-vis the competition. Because we saw Ford throw in the towel of doing an electric EV for Lincoln along with Rivian. So they axed that program. You're probably going to see others, to your point, Gary, that say, hey, look, we can't make money on these things right away. We're going to push it back. But especially in Europe and China, there are mandates for EVs. Even here in the U.S., California has its ZEV mandate. I think there's 14 other states that have signed up that they're going to go along with it. I think a few others are going to be coming along in that regard too. So if you delay your EV program now, and I fully understand why. I mean, if you don't have the money, what are you going to do? But those who can stick to their program, I think EV programs are going to come out of this in a competitively advantageous position.
I think it's all come from the top. The trick is when you've got your sales department working against your future. And by that, I mean, when they come out with 0% financing for 84 months and the first 3 months free, what's the incentive for a consumer to go and try a new technology when they're in essence getting that money for nothing?
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying there, but look, the 0% stuff is going to go away as soon as car sales start to come back to some semblance of normalcy. And like I said, you still have these mandates that the automakers have to meet. Maybe governments will start to bend a little bit. I'm not sure how they do that. Maybe they don't impose the kind of fines, especially in Europe, that they're talking about. I don't think that they're going to back off on their mandates that are on the books. So there will be other ways that consumers get incentivized to go get electric cars. But it's not going to be a magic switch. We're not going to see all of a sudden millions of people going out and buying electric cars in the next couple of years. It's going to be over the next decade that happens.
And to be fair to Ford, Kumar Galhotra, who used to be head of Lincoln, and we had him on the show back when he was the head of Lincoln, is now running Ford in the Americas and internationally as well. He got a new job added to his business card. Like, these guys don't have enough work to do, so they just add a continent or two to them. He was asked today in Automotive News webcast about electric vehicles and about the Rivian situation, and he was very straightforward. Ford is going to continue with electrification. Ford believes in electrification. And he was saying, that there were calibration engineers have Mach-E's in their garages at home, and they're still engineering these things. So that's going to be a part of what they're going to be up to as well. So I think perhaps we're seeing General Motors pushing more bets on the table than other OEMs are right now. And I don't know, John, you're pretty optimistic about that, but I don't know.
Yeah, well, sorry, go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I'm a little bit cynical about the Rivian and Lincoln situation. I think it's very convenient to recruit a company that's highly recruited and be the winner, the company that gets to work with Rivian. There was some competition there that, it looked like it was going to be GM for a while, wound up being Lincoln. Now that he saw a little bit, we're not really interested in working with you anymore. It seems a cynic might say that was a tactic rather than any real strategy on their own personal electrification plans.
Yeah, but a cynic is not looking at the bottom line. And Ford Motor Company is burning through cash right now. I fear for the Ford Motor Company. I truly do, because they're burning through their cash hoard. Even once production resumes, which it looks like it will do in another week or two, and sales start to come in, they get some cash coming in, it's not enough to replenish what they've already burned through. So you got to start taking an axe to things. And even though GM has not axed its EV program or its autonomous one either, for that matter, they are taking an axe to everything else that they can find in the company. And that's what it takes to get through, maybe us teetering on the verge of another Great Depression right now. You've got to take drastic action. I think if not for this, Ford would be charging right ahead with Rivian.
So we've mentioned incentive programs to get people into the dealerships and to buying vehicles. So there's some talk about whether or not we need another Cash-for-Clunkers. Now, for those who may not be familiar or have deliberately forgotten about this, I didn't know that there was actually an acronym. It was Car Allowance Rebate System. So it was actually called CARS. And it was a $3 billion program that ran from July 1st to August 24th, 2009. So to qualify, you had to turn in a car that was drivable, that was less than 25 years old, and it had to get 18 miles per gallon or less, because part of the incentive was they wanted to increase the fuel efficiency of the cars that would be bought. And the new car had to cost $45,000 or less, and you got a voucher for $3,500 or $4,500. So in all, there were about 700,000 transactions as a result of this. Now, there have been a lot of critics that said, that just basically, caused people to buy sooner than they would. Okay, so all of that is as prelude. What do you guys think? Do we need another Cash-for-Clunkers?
Go ahead, Jason.
That's a tough question to answer, because I think Cash-for-Clunkers was successful on some levels in getting some of those old cars off the road, but it was really another way to bail out the auto manufacturers, and requiring people to buy new cars was part of the program. I don't know if that's a great solution.
Yeah, I would say Cash-for-Clunkers was more of a handout to car dealers than to the car companies. Obviously, it benefited the car companies too. But the dealers were desperate. And guess what? They're desperate right now. They would love another Cash-for-Clunkers or whatever you want to call it, or however you want to, scheme that you want to put together. All they want are people maybe not even coming to the dealerships, because there's so much more online buying that's going right now, and no touch delivery of the cars to the consumer's house. But car dealers are going to need help, desperately are going to need help. Right now in the United States, there's 3.2 million vehicles sitting on dealers' lots. They got to floor plan those things. They got to buy it from the factory to turn around and sell it to consumers. So they're financing that stuff. And those cars and those trucks and those vans are just sitting there right now for the most part. I believe Congress is not just for the auto industry. There's going to have to be massive cash infusion into the economy. They've already come up with one tranche, over $2 trillion. They stepped up with another half a trillion. I think there's going to be needed at least another $2 trillion to prevent this economy from going into a depression. And the auto industry is going to have to be a key component of whatever bailouts there are, because as we all know, one job in the auto industry supports about 7 other jobs in the economy. And so the faster the auto industry comes back, the faster the economy comes back.
Well, one of the things that occurs to me is we look at the situation now compared to 2009. I mean, there are a lot more people who are out of work. And so the question then becomes, is buying a new car going to be the first thing on your list once things resume to normal? I don't know. I mean, that's going to be a troublesome part. And John, as you say, that there's a lot of inventory that are sitting on dealers' lots right now. We've seen that companies like Hertz and Avis are saying, thank you for those cars that we were going to buy, but maybe we don't need them now, because I mean their business is down 80% in the last couple months. And that's we would talk about fleet sales. That's mainly those guys. So what is to be done? Any ideas, Jason?
Well, wasn't one of the motivating factors behind Cash-for-Clunkers supposedly the environment? We were going to get these low MPG cars off the road and get people into more efficient vehicles.
Yes.
Does the current administration care about that anymore? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure either.
I think you both are sure. You just don't want to say it out loud.
There may be that aspect to it as well. But, a couple of anecdotal things here. There are well over 1 million vehicles coming off lease right now. Those people are going to want something new, presumably. The vast majority of them are going to need another car. So there's going to be some demand from that. I'll give you one personal example. My daughter has a 10-year-old car. She's like, I got to get out of this thing. I want a new car. There's going to be a lot of people like her in that situation who were in the market 10 years ago. 10 years that's enough. It's time to get something else. The other thing is when you look at what's happened in China, for example, there's been a big resurgence. They've seen car sales in April in China, April of this year, were better than they were a year ago, well before the virus came. And part of what's driving that are people in China, I think this is going to happen around the world, are going, I'm not getting on a train. I'm not getting on a bus. I'm not getting on a subway. I want my own set of wheels so I don't have to sit, be packed into something with a bunch of other people. Now, that's not going to get us back to a 17 million SAR in the U.S. market. But I think there are things out there that are going to have some amount of demand coming back as soon as the restrictions are lifted.
Although, I think this whole China thing is a not very good comparison with the U.S. because if you look at car ownership that exists in the U.S. right now compared to China, there are a lot of people here who have a car there are a lot of people in China that don't have a car and that are shoved into subway systems or trains or what have you. And yeah, they want this social distancing. So, the percentage of demand here, I think, will be a significantly lower number than the one in places like China.
Yeah.
And you're seeing the same thing. I mean, car sales in Korea are actually going up, and they're in positive space right now again, because, as you say, John, that people want, their own transportation, not a transportation system that has you and you and you and you and you and everybody else in it. So this leads to another subject. So is ride hailing going to be a very small part of the transportation system? I mean, we saw Lyft laid off 17% of its people. Uber has cut 14% of its people. Again, do you want to get in a vehicle that some stranger was in just before you climbed in? And oh, by the way, who's the driver, right?
Yeah.
So what do you think, Jason?
No, I think they're in big trouble, and I think that business was questionable to begin with, and looking at what's going to go forward, there's just no way that they can enforce any kind of health code violations over all those private owners. So I know I would be very hesitant to take a Lyft or Uber in the next 6 months, and I suspect that vast majority of people who were regular users are looking at alternatives.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, okay, we talked, I think last year on the show, John, about the price of medallions for taxis in New York, just value going way down. What do you think is going to happen to taxi drivers?
Same thing.
Well,
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I would hope that because they're part of a company that can provide them services in a garage in a city, the taxi companies all have these garages where they could set up sanitization units, and you're already in a taxi cab in New York. There's a barrier between you and the driver, and that could be reinforced with filters, etc. I think taxis are in a much better position to come out of this than Uber and Lyft.
Interesting.
Yeah, no, I think Jason's onto something here. Same in Detroit. There's a big plastic, thick, plastic barrier between you and the driver. Yeah, if you could have some way to very quickly sanitize the interior of a taxi, then maybe people would be more willing to do it. But, if you see people hailing a cab in New York, one person gets out and another one's getting in the nanosecond that they're clear. So how do you change that kind of behavior? And, when we had Bob Gallion on the show, he talked about this battery company that's got the electrolyte that can kill COVID-19 dead in I think he said a minute or less. So if somehow you could spritz the interior of a taxi with that stuff and prove that it's sanitized, maybe people would then say, okay, I'll take the taxi.
Yeah, it's going to be a very strange situation in terms of everything. So you mentioned earlier about buying cars online in this touchless experience. Is that going to be the norm going forward? What do you think, Jason?
I think more and more. I think that if it weren't for franchise laws and the way that dealers have had a stranglehold on the way cars are sold in the United States, that this would have been something that would have happened a long time ago. It would be so much cheaper and easier for the car dealers to sell cars directly and use the dealers as a delivery system, rather than building cars and selling them to dealers and then hoping that the dealers are able to sell them on. Think about really production on demand could be the norm. If you'd order your car, you'd get it built, and it would already be sold by the time it was built.
That assumes that we'll suddenly become patient. And I think if we're seeing anything, that the Americans are not patient about anything, as we're seeing about, we can't stay locked down for years. Well, we've been locked down for weeks. I mean, it's not years. And so
no,
as you say,
it's a sea change. It's definitely an enormous change to the industry.
Right.
But I think it's one that would make sense for the manufacturers. I don't know if it would make sense for the dealers. There's also, the change like we're doing here. Last year, I would have driven 20 miles and come and been in the studio with you. Here we are doing pretty much the same show without leaving our homes. So how many opportunities are people going to take to stay home after this whole crisis is over? Not locked in, but working remotely. I bet a big percentage of us will discover, oh, I never really had to leave home in the first place.
That's right. That's right. And, the number one complaint of people buying a new car is how long they have to be at the dealership. I mean, if you go in sight unseen with no prep work done ahead of time, it can take up to 4 hours, with your financing and all that stuff thrown in, getting the title, blah, blah, blah. People hate that. They're so excited to get their new car, and they, just trudge out of the dealership after spending at least a couple of hours there. They hate it. So dealers have never wanted to talk about that. They've always wanted people, they still do. They still want people to come into the dealership. But I think this situation is going to change it for a lot of consumers. They're just going to say, I want to do everything online. You can get my electronic signature. It's totally legal. You can buy houses that way. Why not cars? So I think this is going to start to change to doing a whole lot more of the buying process online. Maybe not 100% of it, but it's going to be a whole lot different than before this crisis hit.
Not a good time to be a car salesman as a career.
So what does this do to new vehicle launches? I mean, we're going to see some important vehicles come out of car companies this next several months. We're going to have the Bronco, we're going to have the Mach-E, we're going to have the Escalade. I mean, how is this going to be handled?
I think we're already seeing it, Gary. I'm sure you've been invited to these online launch events. All the technical presentations that we've been doing in person in the past are now being done, as a Zoom presentation. And honestly, as far as gathering the information, it's not that big a loss. There's also a Q&A period that's done as a chat, and the only thing that's missing is how do we get to drive the cars, and the cars come later. I think that they're going to figure out that is a much cheaper way to do things, and perhaps they'll put the cars at regional outposts, and we'll travel short distances to go get the cars and drive them on routes. But they won't require the level of presentation and staffing that a launch event costs now. That launch events can run into millions of dollars just to get automotive journalists some seat time and get some traffic online. I really think there are efficient ways to do the same thing.
Yeah, I agree, Jason. All these car companies love to go to beautiful places and nice resorts so the journalists have a very nice experience. But as you guys know, sometimes they go to remote places. It can take 8 hours of flying time, including connections and going to the airport and all that kind of thing. I really don't want to do that. I especially don't want to go to the airport and get on a crowded airplane right now. I'm not sure when my opinion of that's going to change.
I don't think you'd have to worry about being on a crowded airline right now.
Gary, how do you think they're going to handle it?
I don't know. I think that there are all kinds of question marks. I mean, let's say that you didn't have to even travel 8 hours on an airplane, John. Are you going to want to fly 3 hours on an airplane? Do you want to get in an airplane at all? I just was reading today that let's see. American Airlines stock closed at its lowest price since it started trading in its current form in December 2013, while Delta shares were closed at the lowest price since September 2013, and Southwest stock fell to a 6-year low. So who wants to fly? Not very many people, right? So then the question becomes, okay, what we do is we get into a car with someone and sit with that person for several hours, right? Do we want to do that if we don't know whether that person's healthy or not? So that
I'll sit with you, Gary.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Jason.
Yeah.
And then the third question on all of this is to say, okay, I get out of a car, and then Jason, you get into the car. It hasn't been cleaned. It's just, you got to swap. Do you want to do that? Do I want to do that? Do you want to do that, John? It's another big question. It's a big issue.
Yeah.
Now, I think that the car makers have realized over the years that, they're getting bang for their buck. So while it is a big investment, they're also getting a return on that investment. But still, the whole procedure changes. And isn't it sort of ironic that, you were saying, Jason, that, you do these Zoom meetings. So rather than driving to, a nearby facility to meet with, engineers from Ford or Hyundai or wherever, you're sitting in your living room, not driving. It's like not driving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, I got a more important question. What's your cat's name, Jason? And
this is
hold your cat up so we can see it a little bit better.
There you go, Cisco.
Beautiful cat, beautiful eyes.
He recently learned how to open doors.
Oh no!
I haven't. So he was out, and he just decided to come in, and he's much quieter if I hold him. So there you go. It's my work partner, Cisco.
Yeah. But, going back to the discussion, Gary, you're right. Automakers have always had these grandiose drive programs at the launch of a new car where they bring in journalists, in many cases, from all around the world. In fact, as you guys know, on the big international intros, it's wave after wave after wave of journalists that can go on for weeks at a time. But they always did it because, to your point, Gary, we'd report on their cars and everything. And the unearned or the earned media that they got, i.e. us reporting on it in magazines and newspapers and radio and television and online. And, when they added up the value of that and looked at, if we had to buy that kind of airtime, it would be way more than what we're spending on the journalists. But to your point, Jason, they're doing these online reveals right now. In fact, I think Hyundai's got one tomorrow. And so we're all going to be on there. We're going to do all the reporting, and they're going to look at it and go, wow, we're getting all this earned media. And all we did was a Zoom meeting. It cost us next to nothing to do. Now, then the key is, it's one thing to get all the specs and do the Q&A and blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. You really need seat time. And that's the only thing that I think is going to throw a monkey wrench into this. But they always can do regional events where they have a bunch of cars, and maybe they're not going to get the turnaround as quickly as they had wanted in the past, but they're going to get it a whole lot cheaper than they ever did.
And also, they're not going to take up as much executive time as, these launch events with the wave after wave could take 2-3 weeks by the time everyone gets through. And you're tying up key executives and engineering personnel just to do this. It's always been a very inefficient system.
It's not all about efficiency. Think about it. So the relationships that we've had the opportunity to make over the years by being with these people, okay, and now that's not going to happen. This industry now is going to undergo a transformation in many different ways. Whether it's as you were saying, John, they're rationalizing their product more. They're looking at what they can build profitably. Now we're going to see a situation where they're going to be saying, okay, we've got to do things differently in terms of how we go to market, how we introduce vehicles. how we have the relationships with, other people, whether it would be dealers. I mean, because a lot of times they bring dealers out to these things and get them to be able to soak into the vehicle before it's in the showrooms, whether it's with journalists. I mean, it's going to be a whole different thing. And I don't know if anybody has looked at all of the ramifications that this is going to have. So, John, a week or two ago, we were talking about, esports and whether watching NASCAR drivers sit in their living rooms or their family rooms or their rec rooms or their garages and drive virtually on tracks. Today, IndyCar announced that it will start its series on June 6th in a real race at Texas Motor Speedway. Nobody in the stands. So, I mean, what is the ramification of that? What does that do to motorsports when there are no
beer sales?
Yeah,
beers, exactly. But I mean,
well, that hurts the tracks because the tracks make most of their money from people coming through the gate and then buying all the concessions. So those, number one, are the ones that are hurt. So I think they're going to have to revamp the television money and make sure that, the promoters, the track owners get a bigger chunk of that. So, because look, I'm a motor racing fan. I love watching motor racing. It's cool to be at the track, but man, it's so much better if you really want to know what's going on in a race to watch it on television. So I don't mind not being able to go to a track per se, but the whole economics of the racing industry depends on tracks and the tracks making good money. And, especially when you get into an expensive series like Formula One, where they charge the tracks a fortune to put on a race, it's going to become even more critical for them.
Okay, John. Now, when I would go to the race down at Belle Isle, I would see you there. So for everyone who thinks that you just sit in your house and watch TV, that's not true. You go to races. And, again, I mean, part of that whole, becoming a race fan is like engaging with other race fans. And this. So, yeah, I don't know how they can do it. I mean, I can't imagine that there would be like, a seat and then 6 feet and another seat and I mean, obviously that's not going to work, but
right.
And I just look at this as just like a knife through butter in terms of what it's doing to the industry in many ways.
Yeah,
Gary, but you sound like a 20th century guy. You're really into getting in person with people and interacting and all. That's the past, man.
Insufficiently digital, huh?
Yeah, all digital. Stay at home with your cat.
Yeah, that's right. Well, look, it's a little past the top of the hour. We ought to wrap up right now. But Jason, thanks for coming on the show. And I got to tell you, you got to train Cisco to sit in front of your laptop camera, and then you can sit off camera. And while Cisco looks like, is it a he or she?
It's a he.
He, okay. If we can make it look like Cisco is answering all the questions or opining, this show gonna go viral.
I'll work on it.
John, how do you know that Cisco wasn't answering the questions? He was just talking very quietly.
That's right. He's pulling Jason's strings.
He said. Mm-hmm.
Real good. Well, we're going to sign off. Thanks again, Jason and Gary. Let's keep doing it. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah. Okay.
Autoline After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires. Your journey, our passion.
Visit our website, Autoline.tv, where you can watch us live Thursday afternoons. Get your daily fix with Autoline Daily and in-depth analysis and interviews with Autoline This Week. There's all that and much more at Autoline.tv.